there's a point, I think it happens right before sunrise and right before no, or right after sunset. And it's where there seems to be like this blue light across everything. And if I have those times of day wrong, photographers, please don't come for me. But it's where light is completely distilled, I think. And there's just like this lovely blue light across everything. And it made me think of, it's just so serene. Like I even Googled photographs that were taken during what's called blue hour. And it's just a very calm and serene and peaceful place. And that is something that this main character, she's just never really felt that. And for her to have that in that moment that she did and notice that, and have Noah, her photography student, notice that, it was just very special for her. So, yeah.
Totally. This is a narrator who is in search of some serenity and kind of desperate for peace.
Yes.
Like a peace, like an inner peace and an outer peace. And that's hard to come by in this world.
Yeah. She's had some familial trauma before she and her husband began experiencing infertility and miscarriage that she is not addressed, or she's addressed in her own way that was not the most conducive to healing. It was mostly a destructive way that she dealt with the trauma. And then now so in Blue Hour, the photographer, I can't remember if I mentioned that she's nameless, but the photographer, the main character, one of her photography students is shot by the police. The student was unarmed. And she tells her husband, if this next round of IVF does not work, I don't want to keep trying. And her husband desperately still wants to try and have a child with her. And for a lot of reasons for her, she, one, doesn't want to bring a Black body into this world. My main character is Black Japanese. Her husband is white Jewish. She's afraid of just what this world would do to the child. And also her role in her family. She was the middle child in her family. She's someone who always feels like she's messing up. She always feels like, I'm not going to get this right. And I'm going to F this up in some way. And so she has this ambivalence about motherhood, in part because of, I don't want to bring a Black child into this world. And also because, oh my goodness, what if I ruin this child? We already have this world, and then there's me. I don't want to mess this up. And then, there's a scene early on where she has a miscarriage, and she's in the bathroom, and sac comes out of her, and she kicks it. And I've gotten a lot of feedback about that, like, holy, what? And like, how could she? Because it seems like the thing to do would be to show reverence somehow and cradle it, or like do something that gentler might happen. And the fact that she kicks it, it was here's another mistake I've made. I want to be as far from this mistake as possible. Right. That also battling with the deep sadness of what just happened to her. And having those two kind of competing forces together. Yeah, this is just a character who, she's been through it. So, yeah.
Totally. Totally. I mean, you mentioned this previous trauma. She has lost most of her family
Mm-hmm.
in a car accident.
Yeah.
Parents, younger sister, and feels a level of responsibility for it.
Mm-hmm.
She was, they were visiting her prior to the accident and on not the best of terms.
Correct.
And then she responds to that massive trauma and loss, as you mentioned earlier, in not the most constructive or helpful of ways when it comes to healing. There's a lot of self-medication, a lot of kind of reckless behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Totally understandable and human. I mean, my
Sure.
God, for somebody to experience something like that. And then, in the kind of present day of the novel, as she's struggling with infertility and miscarriage, I relate a lot to the reality of the grief of it. As I was telling you before we came on the air, like my wife and I went through 5 miscarriages.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly one of them, at least one of them, happening in the bathroom, like not entirely dissimilar to the one that you write about. And I think this is a
Wow.
familiar experience for a lot of women, a lot of couples. And the thing that I loved about the book is the fact that it honors the grief of that kind of loss, because it is a weird kind of loss. It's like, is it a person?
Right.
Is it a full person yet? Or are you allowed to grieve? Like, is it merited to grieve a child that you've never really met, but that,
Yeah.
and yet if you go through it, I would, I think some people are more cavalier about it than others, but most people, it's a deep loss, especially women, but I think
Mm-hmm.
also fathers. Like, I remember feeling genuinely grieved by these losses. And I think that the other thing about the way that you portray this narrator and her husband as they try to conceive is that with each loss, the tension and the stress of pregnancy escalates.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that until we started losing all these pregnancies. And it was like every time we would get pregnant, it would be this like joy coupled with this terror.
Right.
Like you almost wanted to, I just wanted to like wrap my wife in bubble wrap,
Yeah.
like just don't move. Like just don't be stressed out, eat all the right things, just sit
Yep.
there and let this thing, grow. And so I don't know, you portray that in a way that really hit home and felt both lived in and human and real.
Thank you. I started this, I started Blue Hour 2014 or 2015. And at the time, they weren't even just friends, just several people, like blogging was still kind of big, and women were talking kind of still a little bit hush hush about miscarriage and how there's still a great deal of shame behind it. And I did something wrong. And like I said, my character's like, get this other mistake away from me. Not the fetus as a mistake, but the fact that she couldn't, her body wouldn't carry it to term. She is owning as her mistake, as if it was deliberate. And sometimes, it's seen as, oh, well, I wonder why that's happening. What are they doing? What are they, whatever? And it's like, I didn't do it. Guys, it's not me trying to do this thing. And anyway, there was just a great deal of shame around it, a great deal of, I don't know, like getting pregnant again. Should I be happy? Should I be super cautious? Am I allowed? But then also, I should still be grieving maybe because I lost this thing and I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to feel. And then, people talk about going to their, women talk about going to their appointments and being excited for their appointments. I get to see the baby today, or, whatever it is. And instead of that being a joyous occasion, it's one filled with, oh my God, what happens if they don't find the heartbeat?
Right. Yeah, totally. And then like, yeah, I remember one miscarriage at the OBGYN with my wife, and just, very upset. It's just a huge bummer. And then having to walk back out through the lobby of the doctor's office, and there's all these like happy pregnant women
Yeah.
in the lobby, and you're just like, ugh, just such a heartbreak.
Yeah.
And maybe not something that people talk about a lot. And I think, another thing that you portray very well through this character and in this novel is the way that women can internalize miscarriage as failure, maybe more so than men. It's their
Hmm.
bodies, and it's maybe like it's more personal or something,
Hmm.
if that's a way to put it. And I think it's kind of natural, but it's not, it doesn't, it's not obviously anybody's fault really, right? Unless, I
Right.
guess, if you're, you know, drinking to excess or something during pregnancy,
Right.
then maybe
Yeah.
it would be. But I think for most people who are trying to conceive and take care of themselves, it's not a personal failing.
Yeah. There's a part where I think it's early on when she's meeting with her therapist and she says, um, I can't remember if I used the word betrayal or not, but why won't my body have a baby? Why doesn't my body want to have a baby? And this idea that our bodies are supposed to do certain things. And if mine is not doing a thing it's supposed to do, and it's not happening to these other women who are sitting here in the lobby of the OBGYN, it must be something that I am doing. Why do they get to be happy? Why do they get to carry to term? Why do they get to, fill in the blank with whatever it is? I have multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed in 2017. I was 37 and I lost my vision, went sideways. And then when it finally righted itself, a couple days later, I was seeing double and I couldn't walk. And a lot of other things. And you feel like your body has betrayed you. And you start not even, I don't know if it's always consciously, but looking for ways, how is it that I deserve this? There must be something I did to deserve this. And the main character, well, she doesn't say that directly. There is a conversation um, that she has with her sister in which she says something like, oh, I got rid of one baby, so you must think like this is my punishment. I can't have another one, because the main character did have an abortion early on.
Right.
Yeah. And so your mind just starts going in all these ways, the way the brain does, like, oh, this is some kind of punishment. I must have done something to cause this. And so she really goes in on herself, and she starts seeing herself beginning to not cope in the same exact way she did when her family died, um, but mirroring some of those same patterns, and knowing that that's not a place she wants to get back to again.
Sure.
That's not an existence that she wants for herself, for her husband, for them as a family. Um, and yeah, she finally allows herself to fall apart. And I think that's something a lot of women, but men too, we don't allow ourselves to fall apart. And a lot of the time, that's exactly what the body needs and what the person needs to heal. It's just, let's have our time to fall apart. So,
Yeah. Well, I want to, for the benefit of listeners, and I have to take advantage of this since you did it, which almost no authors do, but on your website, you wrote these lovely little sketches
yeah.
of the main character and her husband Asher.
Hmm.
And I'm going to read first the main character.
Okay.
You describe her as Black, Haitian, and Japanese.
Yeah.
Married her husband Asher after a few short months at the courthouse, wearing a white long sleeve mini dress and Doc Martens. A photographer with a penchant for the odd and overlooked. Teaches photography classes to youth in an old food truck refurbished into a mobile darkroom. Likes pancakes with the edges slightly burnt and crispy. Likes dark humor, vintage jewelry, boxes, noise. Hiccups profusely when she's nervous. So this begs the question: do you hiccup profusely when you're nervous?
I do not. I have no idea where that came from, but
it's adorable though. I love this about her.
I have no idea where that came from, but she's such a kind of hard person, and I wanted to give her something that, like, doesn't even seem like she would be someone who gets nervous. And not only does she get nervous, like, she just can't stop hiccuping. And so I wanted this softer piece to her and I don't know, my brain offered me that, and I loved it, and her husband loves it. So
yeah. Felt real to me. I loved it. And her husband, Asher, you describe as married to main character, white Jewish, tie designer who owns a men's boutique in Brooklyn. Married main character in a floral print burgundy suit. Can only sew to one of Chopin's nocturnes. Deeply romantic. Collects picture frames abandoned on the sidewalk. Drives a Triumph motorcycle. Former line cook. Learned to sew in Hamburg. Likes reading the classics. Bourbon in his pancake syrup. Cooking authentic international dishes. Voice goes up an octave when he's nervous. He hates it. Okay, so first of all, he sounds kind of dreamy. Look at this guy. He can cook. He can sew. He's into Chopin and reading the classics. I'm wondering, as a creative exercise, are these bios something that you did prior to drafting the book or in the midst of drafting the book as you were trying to kind of draw it into focus?
No, I actually did that September of last year. A friend of mine who is a writer and editor, she does picture books. And she said, in the children's world, picture book world, we often talk about creating a world for people to get into before they even, pick up the book. And so that's why I went and I think that's the page you're reading from with this is what they're watching right now. And they're doing what's hanging on the walls of their apartment and stuff like that. And it was really fun to do, just going into kind of this launch season, because I know all this stuff. I've pieced this stuff together for the past 6 to 8 years. But to sit down and be like, okay, if they just had a quick few lines about who they were, what would that look like? And yeah, so it was just fun to pull that together. And some of it's from when I wrote the line cook thing, I said, people are going to say, oh, I wonder if she made that change because she watched The Bear or something. And no, behind the scenes restaurant stuff is trendy or whatever, but he's been a former line cook since 2017. So, but yeah, it was just a really fun thing to do for the website, and just also to kind of narrow in on who these people were. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's great for people who are going to be interviewing you. It gives it gives them fodder. And I loved it too. It's fun to sort of have an author list. These are the shows they're streaming.
Yeah.
This is what the art on their walls looks like. That's just a fun creative exercise. And it is a nice way for, I think, prospective readers or people who have read.
Sure.
To get to know these people better and to have a sense of things. And I want to talk about photography a bit more with respect to the narrator and this job that she has as a photography instructor, working out of, what is it, a converted bread truck or something?
Like a food truck that she,
right.
Yeah, that she converted
into a dark room.
Yeah.
And one of her students, Noah Pierce, I believe
Mm-hmm.
is the name,
Mm-hmm.
is shot by police, unarmed, as you said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, very heartbreaking, all too relatable. I mean, we are talking the day after another school shooting in
Right.
America, in Nashville. And I don't know if you're on social media, but I follow several of the Uvalde parents on
Yeah.
Twitter. And there's this woman who absolutely breaks my heart every day, and yet I cannot look away. And to watch them be re-traumatized and to have to kind of relive. And she's talking about how she's 30 years old. She won't send her son to school because it's
Mm-hmm.
not safe.
Right.
And she's like, I'm not having any more children because this world is so cruel and
Mm-hmm.
broken. And you're just like, if you're anything like me, you're like, I'm speechless. I have nothing to offer. Like, what do
Yeah.
you say to someone? I mean, she's got every right to feel that way,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, of
And
course.
yet, why am I, you're rooting so hard for her and for anyone like her to find some semblance of peace and to continue in life in a productive way and to find happiness, and
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, I understand too, as a parent, like this strange and terrible decision that all parents have to sort of wrestle with. Like, what kind of world are we bringing our kids into?
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be a world that's functional and habitable for them to live in? And then you add to that the question of bringing a brown body into the world
Mm-hmm.
and all that entails, and it sucks that that's a thing, right?
Yeah. I remember when the verdict came out for the police officers in the I'm sorry, I know his name. We all know his name, George Floyd case. Um, and I remember I have a son. My son is 13 and my daughter is 15, almost 16. And my son likes to wear hoodies. It was summertime, I believe, or it was still hot in North Carolina. And he likes to wear hoodies. And at the time, we were still in lockdown, I believe, or like mostly in lockdown. And just to get out of the house, he would just go like walk up the street. And my husband and I sat them both down and we said, you all know about George Floyd, and the verdict came out today. And I don't know, there are going to be some people who are upset. And, we said, Foster, that's my son, if you go outside, we just want you to stay close to the house today. Like, we live in a safe neighborhood, but I also, not that racism isn't everywhere. I'm also very aware that we live in the South. And we were just like, I just want to feel okay. So just don't walk. I don't want you walking around today. And he was like, but why? Well, and explain. And then he's just, at the time he must have been like 11, maybe 12. And he just didn't get it. And to have to explain, well, because, somebody might see you and people are upset about this and that and whatever. And he's just like, I'm just walking to the street though, up the street. Yeah.
Right.
I know. People are just holding phones in their backyard. People are just walking down the street. And to look at your child's face, actually both ways, to look at your child's face and see that they don't get it. And you just have to pull like the parenting thing of, look, just do what I said. just
Right.
Just do what I said. And then also to look at your other child's face who does get it. Neither of those things feel good. The fact that they get it and the fact that they don't. Neither of them feel good. There's a part in Blue Hour where she talks about being on the subway and seeing kids going to school and what their parents must have, black and brown kids going to school, and what their parents must be feeling when they get them dressed for the new school year. Like, I think she says, essentially just try and be invisible, as if that's a possibility, as if saying yes sir, no ma'am, or like hands up, or like having your hands like for people to see them, whatever it is, as if it makes a difference. And we're seeing that it doesn't really make a difference. And parents knowing that, I was working on this. I have my master's in fine arts, and I started this book, like I said, in 2015, 16. And I took draft 3, 4 of this book through an MFA program. And I remember there were a couple of people, not many, a couple, who said they didn't understand why anyone would decide not to have children because of what happened to Noah in the book being shot. And that was a scary, I truly didn't know what to say.
Who were these people?
There were 2 people who said that, I remember. And I was just
in your MFA program.
Yeah. Students. Faculty all got it. My professors were amazing. But there were 2 students who were like, yeah, I don't understand why someone would make that decision. And I was just kind of like, I don't understand why you don't understand why someone would make that decision. And yeah, it's a being a parent has a lot of wonderful things that come with it. And it also has, like, I'm in the teenage years with both of them, and 13-year-old boys. It's not a great time.
My son is like, my son is 7.
Yeah.
Going on 8. So I've got a little time, but
yeah, my son's wonderful, but it's just, we're just in the years right now. And then also just, adding on that extra that he is a Black boy. And there's always a point where when they are little and you're so cute, he's so adorable, he's so this. And then I don't know what day it happens. I don't know the exact age. Then there's like you cross over and somehow you are switched from just being perceived as this adorable little boy, which he was, to, oh, should I move to that side of the street? Should I? And I'm just like, he just wants to play Madden. He's not going to bother you. Like, he's just a normal kid.
Right.
And, it's having to prepare your children for what they might experience, and on various levels. It's a lot. My daughter, she'll be going to college soon. She's got into a program where she'll be at a university this summer, and she's very much a rule follower, and they'll be staying in the dorms. And she's like, what if people drink? And I'm like, well, some kids probably will. And she's like, what if cops come? You don't need to tattle on anybody or whatever. And she's like, but I'm Black. And I was not prepared for that. And it's so disheartening. Like, this program she got into, we're so excited that, like, that's a thing in her head. But I'm Black, Mom. So, yeah, it's it's something you have to think about. It's something you have to talk about in addition to just being a parent, period.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting the way that, I mean, I experienced this. Maybe you can agree or disagree, but it sounds like you probably have had similar experiences where these challenges of parenthood that come up sometimes have so much to do with language.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do I say? Like, my son has disabilities, and
Mm-hmm.
how do I talk to my daughter about it so that she
Mm-hmm.
understands it on her terms? How am I going to discuss it with him, especially as he gets older and
Right.
starts to maybe become more self conscious? Like, what kind of attitude should I have about it? What
Mm-hmm.
phrases should I use? What phrases should I not use? Do you know
Right.
what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
you obsess about this stuff? It's like, damn, this is a big responsibility because the way that you frame it is going to color the way that they frame it for a good
Exactly.
while.
Exactly. It's funny. I tell people, like, nobody can really prepare you. I know this isn't a parenthood podcast, but no one can really prepare you for parenthood. Because I feel like people told me, like, you wouldn't sleep at first and you'll worry and whatever. But I feel like nobody said you are responsible for the whole psychological development of a human being based
Yeah.
on, like, even just things. I had wonderful, wonderful parents. Things like one day I'm just in a bad mood and maybe I gave a child a side eye or something. And at 35, that side eye that I gave them at age 4 or whatever it is, like that created a story for them. And so, yes, picking apart language, it's like, hey, daughter, I want you to go to college and have a good time and da da da. But also, the world's really scary. And also, but have a good time. There's strength in numbers. But also, this, don't be out past this time because XYZ could happen. And so, like, you want them to be aware without, like you said, coloring their whole worldview negatively. And I mean, I have no right answers. I know sometimes I say things well, and then sometimes I'm like, well, that was a mess. So we'll just start
Yeah.
saving for therapy, maybe. I don't know.
I can relate to that. And I think any parent, if they're being honest, can relate to that. Like, you're not going to bat 1,000.
Yeah.
You do the best you can. And my like theory of the case from the beginning has just been like, it's not as much about what I say. It's more about what I do,
Yeah.
like how I am. Like, no amount of pontificating, no speech I'm going to give is going to be nearly as impactful as just like the everyday example, like basic example that I set. So
Yeah. Yeah. And
maybe to a fault, maybe I should say more sometimes, but I'm just like, you know what? I don't know. I'm just going to try to be calm and nice.
yeah. And I think too, one thing I have learned is sometimes the answer really is just, I don't know. And
Sure.
I will tell them, you know what? I really don't know. We
Yeah.
can talk about it. We can read some things together. Like I'm always open to doing that with them. But I decided a while ago, if I really don't know, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I do just because I'm whatever age I am. Um, I'll say I don't know and we can figure it out. And I think that's a place where the main character finally comes to, like, she just starts in this place of, like I was saying, here's this other mistake that I've, quote unquote, I've made that I'm not able to carry to term. And then also a bit of relief because if I did, there's this outside world. And also, if I did, I'm going to F this child up because I'm a mess. And it almost sounds like, you need to go through like a decade of therapy or something before you decide to have children. Like, that's not the answer either, but maybe, I don't know. But she
It
was
can't
just,
hurt.
she was just very real about what she considered her shortcomings. And that's the thing, or just very real about herself in general. Did it skew negative a lot? Yes. And with the main character is in therapy with her therapist, she was able to get to a place to at least begin to be open to a glimmer of hope. And I think that's what I love so much about her too, is that even though she feels like such a screw up and a mess and the world is awful, there's still this little piece that is like, but I love this man. I love my husband. And I want to, when she, parts where she is still pregnant, she talks about creating this person who is both him and her. And that little piece brings her joy. And I think that's a lot of that is what carries her through it. I'm happy for her that she allowed herself to have that piece, even if it was dampened a lot, quite a bit. That she was still able to cling to that little piece of hope for her.
Well, let's talk about hope, because it's a huge issue for any parent, prospective parent. Like we talked about it a bit earlier, you know, this decision you have to make, like, is it responsible to bring kids into a world this fucked up? Like, what am I doing here? And yet so many of us do it. And we make that leap. And is it irrational? Like, does it take like irrationality at this stage of human evolution and, you know, the ecology of the planet? Do you have to just be irrational? Like just basically block out reality in order to do it? Are we at that point? And, you know, I guess like at a certain point for me, I become a little bit indignant, and it's just like, I don't know. I can't accept. I think I just can't accept that it's, what are we just supposed to stop reproducing and having families? Like, I don't know. It seems like such a bleak way of looking at things. And yet I wonder, like, maybe that's the realist approach at this point, you know?
You asked if it was irrational. I think yes. I think at any time deciding to embark on parenthood, there's a little bit of irrationality happening. And at the same time, family can, and I should probably speak for myself, family can bring so much joy. Even if outside is this nightmare or nightmares, plural, piled on top of each other, inside there can still be a lot of joy. I usually pick my daughter up from school. She's in 10th grade. And one day, Mr. Brightside by the Killers came on, and she started singing it. She feels like she was born at the wrong time. She likes early 2000s music from before she was born. And she started singing it. And I used to love that song. And so I just turned it up. And we were both just like singing at the top of our lungs in the car to Mr. Brightside. And I remember telling my husband that evening, that made me really happy. How long is the song? 3.5 minutes. And those 3.5 minutes were really, really joyful. And those are the pieces we hang on to. My son plays football. His team made it to the Pop Warner Super Bowl. Did you know that was even a thing? I did not.
I think I can imagine in Pop Warner that there would be, you got to call the championship game something, right?
Like, I did not know that was a thing until last year, where Pop Warner teams nationwide all went to Orlando and competed, and they got into Universal Studios. Nobody else was there. They closed down the park just for the football teams. And there was also like a cheerleading competition too. So it was Universal Studios full of pubescent, prepubescent boys and girls, just, and everything was free in the park. And they stayed in a hotel or what's it called? A resort with their teammates. And my husband was a coach, so the two of them went, and my daughter and I stayed home. And then I decided we would fly down and surprise them and go to their one of their games. And just seeing him, like, just so happy, and he's very shy, but seeing him being chatty and just so happy to be with his teammates, that brought me joy. And it was this, and I said, this is why. And part of the reason, like, we could have streamed the games, but part of the reason I decided at the last minute, I asked my daughter, I was like, do you have any tests coming up this week? No, cool. We're going to Orlando. And we went down. I said, because I want this. This is a big thing for him, and I want us to experience this as a family. And those moments, the little ones singing in the car, and then those bigger ones, I think that's why we keep doing it. And my main character, there's a part where I think Asher, am I allowed to just spoil like the ending? Do we do that here?
I mean, I leave it to the author's discretion, so you're
Okay.
welcome to. But maybe listeners should know that there's a spoiler alert.
There's a spoiler alert coming. There's a part at the end where Asher is lying on the floor, telling with their baby on his chest and his hand on her back, and he's just telling her stories. And while, yes, the world is terrible outside, she was so happy in that moment, and she's allowed to have that. And isn't even that a form of fighting back to allow yourself to experience joy in this way, when I know all you want for me is misery and this nightmare that you all are creating. And so, is it irrational? Yes. And we still do it because we get to have those moments. And yeah.
There's nothing better than when your kid is like proud of himself or proud of herself. And you see that, like the Pop Warner thing. I didn't realize. I thought you meant like Pop Warner, like local Super Bowl. I didn't mean like I didn't know you meant.
Oh, no. Yes. It's local teams from all, like, the championship teams locally, all of them from the United States went to Orlando to compete for the national Pop Warner championship. So yeah.
Did your son's team win it or no?
No. They won their first game. They got knocked out in the second game. That was on a Thursday, and then the final game was a Saturday. So like they got pretty far.
And just the experience. I mean, I remember that, like playing soccer as a kid and traveling for tournaments and you're staying at like an Embassy Suites, and you think it's the greatest thing ever.
The resort was actually really, really nice.
Yeah,
and they played, their second game was played on an actual football field, like a stadium football field. And so like seeing them on a Pop Warner field, it seems normal. And then you see them on stadium field, and my son's a running back, and like they're running, and we were just laughing, like they're not used to having to run this long. The field is not this long when they play usually, but like they got to march into the stadium with their flags. Like it was very cute and exciting for them. So yeah.
That's great.
But yeah, I didn't know that was a thing until December, and I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you about the actual writing of this book, because the
Mm-hmm.
narrative is braided and it has a collagey feel to it. And I'm always interested in how writers execute on the page, but I think because I am working on a book that's in a similar mode, even though it's
Yeah.
nonfiction, I know the challenges presented by braided narrative. And I know too, as a reader, the way that such narratives, particularly when they're done well, can
Mm-hmm.
kind of trick you into thinking that maybe it's easy or easier than, it might actually be.
Yeah.
But, just I want to try to present to listeners some of the threads that you're weaving here. There is obviously the relationship between the narrator and Asher. There is the photography school that she runs out of the food truck,
Mm-hmm.
and the relationship that she has with one of her students, in particular, Noah, who is shot by police. There is the miscarriage thread, and there is the family loss trauma thread. The narrator's family history, the loss of her parents and her younger sister in a car accident. There's the relationship that she has with her surviving sister, Viola, who I don't
Mm-hmm.
think we have brought up yet.
No.
Or maybe we did a little bit in the context of the abortion that the narrator
Yes.
had years
Yes.
ago.
Yeah.
There's the friend narrative. We haven't brought up the friends yet. There's Jameson
Mm-hmm.
and Kendra. Is that the names?
No. And because I'm a little nervous, I'm blanking on my own character's name.
Listen, I have the book right here. I mean,
Oh
I
my
can.
goodness.
There's Jameson and then Viola. Let's see if I can find it. Now we have to find it for the
I'm
benefit
so
of others.
embarrassed.
No, honestly, this is the most relatable thing ever, because is it Erica? No.
Erica, yes. Oh my goodness. Yes, Jameson and Erica.
Jameson and Erica are their friends, are friends of the narrators and friends of
Yes.
Asher, kind of couple friends. But Jameson is also a former lover of the
Yes.
narrator. They went to college together, and they were kind of a couple, or they hooked up when she was in her post-traumatic,
Yeah.
reckless drinking stage, basically, and was kind of sleeping with a lot of people and behaving recklessly in a lot of different ways. And so that's a thread.
Yeah.
Then there's the documentary that the narrator
Mm-hmm.
is working on. She's working on a documentary film about motherhood as a way of
Yes.
kind of processing a lot of the feelings that we've been talking about, and
Yeah.
processing loss of pregnancy and, all this kind of stuff. I could be missing
I
a
think you
thread.
covered everything.
Okay, but there are a
Yeah.
lot of threads to weave, and to keep
Yeah.
this thing feeling unified, and to keep the narrative feeling propulsive, and to make sure that you're bringing the reader along and that you're not losing them.
Right.
So I just would love to hear about the creative process that you went through to get to that point.
Sure. This book was not fragmentary when it started. It was far more linear. It was about, I think the final word count is somewhere around 33,000 words right now. It was originally it was twice that. And it was,
But 33 is short.
yeah, it's short. And it was about 60, what's twice that? About 66,000 words, 65,000 words originally. And, it started out with both Asher and the main character being a narrator, and so it would alternate first person point of view, and the main character also had a name early on. And when I went through, I know I sent it to an editor, and she had some very good feedback, and I put it away for like a year and a half even. And I went back to it, and I've always wanted to write something more fragmented. I felt like I was doing a lot of explaining, which I feel like you could kind of get away with in an early draft, because, what's the saying? First drafts are you just telling yourself the story. So just kind of figuring out, okay, what exactly is is going on. Like Noah wasn't even a person in the first few drafts. Um, and then I'll jump ahead. When I went to grad school, my first semester, I had sent it to an agent. She's my agent now. And she said, something, I love it, but there's just something, I think it's with the husband. And she said, have you considered cutting the husband as a narrator? And I remember being like, no, ma'am, like to myself, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. This is supposed to show how, men experience miscarriage as well, and can't do it. Nope, absolutely not. And then I said, how long? And she said, or make it more compelling. And I said, how long do I have to make these changes? She said, take however long you want, however long you need. I went to grad school. That had less to do with my book, more to do with being diagnosed.
With MS.
Yes, with MS, and realizing I was totally on the wrong path that I was not supposed to be on, but that's a whole other podcast episode. And I remember the first semester, I was reading through feedback, and the feedback wasn't even about what I'm about to say, but I was just reading through feedback and then also just reading through my pages. And I went, oh, geez, I need to cut him as a narrator. She's right. And like you give yourself like a couple like weeks grieving period. And I remember this next semester was starting, and we always have to turn in a certain number of pages. And what I did was 3 days before, I said, the fragmentary thing was not leaving me. I said, what would this look like fragmentary? And I just started chopping it up. I said, I just need to get 15 pages to turn in. What would 15 pages look like fragmentary? And I turned that in, and I remember I presented the original way, and then like the original first 15 or so pages, and then the fragmentary 15 or so pages. And my professor that semester, we were in group, and my group had read both. And my professor said, obviously, you are the author. You make your decisions. You can do what you want. Do the fragmentary. And a student said of the fragmentary, if I was in a bookstore and I read this, I would have walked out of the store having bought the book. And so from there, I printed the whole book. I thought I could be one of those people who like prints the whole book out and has stuff on the floor and cuts stuff up.
Right.
I found out
that dream too.
I found out I'm not that person at all. And I did go through and just kind of like crossed out like does this need to be here? Yes or no? I don't think so. This is gone. Does this need to be here? Yes or no? I don't think so. This is gone. And really what I finally understood was I was trying to force it to be about the couple, and it really wasn't about the couple. The story was about her. And once I allowed the story to be what it wanted, like actually wanted to be, and stopped trying to force it into this hole that I've decided, like, no, this is the tunnel we're going to go down. I'm not going to say writing is easy, but it becomes easier to see where you're going. Or at least it did for me. And then looking back to, I don't think I shared this with my agent, but I shared it with another writer friend. I enjoyed when I was doing it, first person POV for the husband and the wife. When I was writing the husband, I was always thinking about getting back to writing the wife. And I really enjoyed writing her. And so my challenge was, how do we make this a story about her and still have Asher? Because this is a thing you experience as a couple. Yes, the woman feels, I guess, most of it, but that baby was part of him too. And so I wanted to make sure that he was part of the loss as well. And I thought the only way I could do that was through first person point of view, from his point of view. And once I realized the story was about her, and I could still weave in how he handled loss through her and have it work, and not just work, but work way better than it did when I had it the other way. Yeah, it was a lot. The process was a lot of, one, just understanding the story myself, and then two, it's just not forcing it to be something that I had. You know, you have this idea and you're like, okay, that's what it has to be. And allowing the story to be like, girl, I know way more than you do, so can you just like move out of the way so
Yeah.
I can be what I'm supposed to be. And once I let that happen. Yeah.
Well, were there things that your professor or students in workshop specifically were telling you about the fragmentary version as it differed from the original? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I know they said this is the one, but like, did they tell you why?
I'm sure they did. I don't remember exactly, outside of it just moved the way it moved.
That's why I'm so glad to hear you said it, because that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I feel like, and you said this earlier, early iterations of a manuscript are often the author telling the story to themselves and getting their bearings, like
right.
knowing who these people are, what's the landscape, what are they up against, what happens in the story. But that kind of telling, and I think that this squares with the fact that you cut the book in half on a word count level, that kind of telling might be too slow.
Yeah.
For the average reader, for the person coming to the book, you know, in the bookstore. And when you start to make things fragmentary, like obviously not every book needs this,
sure,
but for the ones that do, it does create more velocity and a more interesting reading experience.
Yeah.
It obviously, you know, it also presents new challenges to you as the writer. You know, I think of timeline. If you're moving around in time, you have to make sure you keep the reader oriented, and making sure that with each transition, each section break or whatever it is, the reader quickly knows where they are and who they're with. You know, all these different things that happen when you're moving at high speeds.
Right. Yeah.
On the page.
Yeah. It started to feel, and I loved this for the main character, it stopped feeling like a telling, and it started feeling like a love song, like a love letter even. And my editor said, when he read it, like he even just envisioned the whole thing with like this blue kind of haze around it. And I wanted that to come through. I wanted the urgency of this woman's anger and grief to come through, and making it move as quickly as it did. I mean, that just, and making sure, like, because one, it is short, and two, it's fragmentary, every single word had to do the work. And so like editing, once it was for sure fragmentary, was really down on, like, the story was solid. It's down on a sentence level now, because there is some people get this when I say it. Some people are like, what? But I hear a sentence usually. I hear the melody, the rhythm of a sentence sometimes before I even know what the words are. And so a lot of times when I'm writing, I'll go back like through the paragraph or something and be like, no, there's an extra syllable here, almost like I'm writing poetry, but and the funny thing is I think I'm terrible at writing poetry, but that's, but it needed to be something that was felt not just, bringing physicality into it of, different things she might have done, like the sex, let's say, that she had. I described some of that there, but also what the rhythm of the book felt like, and knowing truly when to slow it down. Like when we get into the funeral, and then after, I slowed it down quite a bit there because I needed the reader to live there a bit longer. This wasn't something we were going to speed through.
Right. And this is the funeral for her parents and her sister.
Oh, no, not that one. This is a funeral for one of the miscarriages.
Oh, right. Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Like the burial.
Yes, the burial, sorry. And there's a part afterwards. It's one of my favorite parts. It made it from the original, where she sees the baby in her dreams, and she says sometimes she's a little girl and we're going to Asher's store and they get a croissant, an almond croissant and whatever. And then she says, and sometimes she's a monster, and calling this fetus a monster. And I needed that to slow down. I needed not even so much the reader. I needed the main character to sit there and really be honest about not just how she felt, but how she experienced this whole thing. She felt like the baby looked like a monster because you could see clear through their body. And I think she even says something about her veins or something being like the roadmap to death. Like, she needed to sit there and allow herself to be that honest. And I needed the reader to experience that with her. So it needed to slow down.
That's where the emotional power comes from. I mean, I don't think the reader can fully feel the grief and the loss with the character unless you take them there.
Yeah. People sometimes ask me one of my friends who I was in school with, who's a journalist and a professor, she blurbed the book, and often asks me, she's like, how do you just go to these ugly, ugly places and within a person? And I just feel like we have to. There's a James Baldwin quote. Actually, it's what's it called? It's in the front of the book about vomiting the anguish up. And as an artist, like, that's what we're here to do, is to vomit the anguish up.
Wait, is it an epigraph?
Yeah. I'm not sure. Do you have the advanced copy or?
Yeah, I have the advanced copy because I don't recall that unless it's somewhere in there.
No, I have a final copy in a box here. It is, all art is a kind of confession, more or less oblique. All artists, if they are to survive, are forced at last to tell the whole story, to vomit the anguish up.
That sounds about right. I can relate to that.
Yeah. And that's what I needed to do. I sometimes I say, method actors, I'm like a method author. Like, I allow myself to really, I am not the main character, but to access some of the ugliness within me so that I can meet her ugliness in her circumstance. And a lot of times it's, what are the things you don't want anyone to know? And then what is that like for your main character? that's what you write.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very good bit of instruction. And it's one of the higher functions, I think, of literature is that you get to go into those places and talk about
Mm-hmm.
what people don't normally talk about. And that's why it's so liberating to read it and so
Mm-hmm.
powerful to read it. And I often feel, if I do not say, when I'm talking to writers or reading their work, especially work that I feel like does not go into these places enough,
Mm-hmm.
or you can sometimes feel when you're reading something that the writer sort of got up close to the edge of it,
Right.
but didn't really go in there.
Yeah.
And the feeling is almost always like you should really have gone in there, or in the
Yeah.
future you really need to press more. And like
Yeah.
you need to write into your pain more, or write into the character's pain more, or go
Yeah.
to the places that scare you. Like that is, I don't know. I don't want to sound too precious about it. And I know there are different ways to do this. There are some writers I think that are truly like just writing to entertain.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, when it comes to literary fiction and work that is aspiring to cut deeply, that's what you got to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like going back to that one scene where in the bathroom where she kicks the sack, I shocked myself with that. I don't know where that came from. And even I wrote it and I was like, oh my gosh. And I could very easily have been like, you know what? That's a bit much. Let's maybe have her do something that could be considered maybe a little less violent because she just had this horrible thing happen. And um, this is a precious thing. But that would have been a disservice to the main character, a disservice to me, and a disservice to the reader. And I say a disservice to me because I only want to continue to get better. And for me, anyway, part of getting better is when something jumps out and shocks you and scares the mess out of you. And how could you even conceive of something like that in your brain? It's my job to make sure that that's what ends up on the page. Whether it makes it to the final, draft or not, that's not the point. The point is that I allowed myself to go there. And that's how I just continue to keep pushing myself. And then also, too, it was true for her. It was true for that character. So it had to happen.
Well, it's a powerful book and a wonderful read. And ultimately, it is, like you were saying earlier, I think when it finally started to click into place and become what it ultimately is, it felt more like a love song.
Mm-hmm.
Like for all of the heartache in this book, all of the trauma in this book, it is a kind of hopeful, beautiful story.
Yeah.
And it's because this character and her husband are pressing against so much darkness in search of the light,
Right.
And I think any parent, any human really, but I mean, in particular, parents who are bringing kids into the world and wanting to create like love and joy in their lives and to live inside of their hopes instead of inside of their fears.
Yeah.
It's a relatable story. That is really the story. It's about
Yeah.
a person working her way towards that. And so I just really enjoyed it, related to it on so
Thank you.
many personal levels and human levels. And I always ask writers if they have another book in the works. It's okay if you don't, but I'm wondering if there's anything in the pipeline.
I do. And it's funny what I was saying about like not trying to force something. I've had an idea for about 2 years now, and I know it's told in 3 parts. And yesterday, I was on my bike and it came to, it was like, this is not a book about a psychopath because the main character is a psychopath. It's not a book about that. It's not even a book about obsession and what we'll do, the lengths that we would go to for love and the memory of somebody that we loved. It's actually a book about the masks that all of us wear. And before I even got to that, a few weeks ago, I was talking with my agent about it, and she was like, this is a pretty ambitious book that you're writing. And I was like, I know. Why can't I just do something simple? But
Right.
at the same time, I told somebody, I said, I loathe that for me, but also I love that for me, that it is rather ambitious. But yeah, there is the main character is ranks high on the psychopathy scale. And also it's about way more than that. It's not that everyone's a psychopath, but how we all just wear certain masks to cope and just to make it, as ugly or not, as ugly as it may be or not. It's just what we do as humans. So that's kind of what I'm working on. It's in the very, very, very beginning stages. So yeah.
Well, I wish you luck on it. I
Thank
guess we
you.
don't know. We don't know yet if it's going to be fragmentary. Maybe it will be.
I don't think so. But yesterday, I told someone when that new kind of idea of it's how people are masquerading or going through life with this mask. I said it's like I'm feeling like it's more of a hybrid. It's still told in 3 parts, but more of a hybrid between like Northwest, Zadie Smith's Northwest, and Jennifer Egan's Visit from the Goon Squad. So I don't think it's fragmentary, but I think structure will vary throughout. So I don't know. I don't think there'll be PowerPoints. I remember getting to that part in A Visit from the Goon Squad and being like, you can do this?
Yeah,
right. But
as
anyway.
it turns out.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the best with it, and congratulations on
Thank
Blue
you.
Hour. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Thank you very much for having me. It was nice.